Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of Confessions of a Business Owner webinar. I'm absolutely delighted this afternoon to welcome Tanya Diggory of Karma. This webinar series is really to help business owners understand and really drill down into their purpose and their why and understand what drives them to do what they do every day. Because it's fair to say most business owners get a couple of years in and they lose sight of that purpose and they start to fall out of love with their business. So we're going to spend the first few minutes of the webinar really digging into what drives Tanya to do what she does every single day, before we then get into understanding about managing anxiety through difficult times as we've got at the moment. So Tanya, good afternoon to you. Just give everybody that doesn't know you a quick potted history of who you are, how long you've been doing what you do, and what you do.
Okay, fab. Thank you and good afternoon. Thanks for having me here, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here again, and hi to everyone joining the call today. Thank you for joining us. So my name is Tanya Diggory. I'm the founder and director of a training organisation called Karma, and we support and empower entrepreneurs, freelancers and business teams to nurture good mental health and well-being. So we do this through workplace training courses, online products such as our membership and our books, and we also do workshops and one-to-one sessions. So that's what we do and how we support. There's a lengthier version of that, of course, which I'm sure we'll sort of unpack a bit today as we go. But essentially, I've been a business owner for 10 years, since 2010. And basically, I've run 3 different businesses, so this is my 3rd one, and have learned a lot during that time. And a big part of that is why I do what I do today. And I know that we're going to be talking about that in a bit more detail today, Gary, as well. So yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, and thank you for your time this afternoon. You know, I set my business up in 2010 and everybody said I was nuts setting up a business in the middle of a recession, and what better time to support business owners than when they need it most. So Tanya, going back 10 years, what was that trigger point for you? You were working for somebody else and there was a trigger point that said, I need to set up my own business and I need to follow this journey. What was that trigger point? What happened?
So I think for me, so I did 2 very different businesses before what I do now. So I was running a dance school, the first business that I ran. So I'm a dance practitioner. And then I ran an international dance events company, you know, on an international scale. So it was a very big leap from the first original business that I ran. And so for that part of my life, I think I just found a gap that I wasn't really getting what I wanted from my, you know, from my other work that I was doing. And I'd actually been self-employed for many years, but I just wanted to set something up for myself because I felt that in the dance world, especially, there wasn't as much around confidence building and self-esteem through creative arts. So that's something that I just really drove a passion for me. But what I'll talk about in more detail today that's relevant to this is why I run Karma, because I've always been creative, actually worked a lot for myself for many years. But then setting up my own business was very much on a sort of like a passion drive. It was just something where I just knew I had to do it. It was something that I just followed with my heart. And it was almost like, you know, you just go with it without necessarily thinking about all that's involved in the very start. You're driven by passion and, you know, this need to create something for the world. So that was the beginning part. But then as things developed, I realized that a stronger, deeper need that's inherent within what we do now with Karma. And that's what drives me absolutely every day. But it's interesting what you say, Gary, about setting up during a recession. And there was a really interesting article by the BBC this week around why setting up a business or running a business during a recession can be the best thing that you could do, because you have to bootstrap anyway as an entrepreneur. And actually in that type of environment, you have to bootstrap even more. You have to scrimp, save. Like, it's never going to be as challenging a time to do it as it would be then. So if you can make a go of it during a recession, it actually can be the best thing that happens to you. And brands like Airbnb were, you know, created during a recession.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found that really interesting.
You know, we talked last week on the call with Andy Steele of 360 Chartered Accountants about unlocking cash in your business that's hidden. And, you know, we talked a little bit around, you know, the activity of the last 3 months is going to drive behavior that perhaps people have got sloppy at, maybe they've got a little bit complacent with, and it's going to force people to go back to basics and just, you know, bootstrap, as you say. So this whole kind of concept of anxiety and mental health, you mentioned that kind of mental health phrase, which is very much on topic at the moment. How understood is anxiety and mental health in, you know, 5.9 million small business owners? Is it understood to be an issue, or have we still not really peeled the layers of the onion back yet?
So it's a really good question. And I think this falls on nicely from the question you asked before. And this is the real trigger point for me, which is why I'm here today, obviously, to share, with you all about anxiety. So if I fall back a little bit, the quick answer to that is there can be more, that I don't think there's necessarily enough out there, which is why I launched Calmer in the first place. But we're getting there. We're definitely in the best time there's ever been for mental health awareness, for access to mental health support, etc. But there's still a stigma attached to mental health in some ways. And there's a lot of talk around poor mental health, but actually understanding the signs, the symptoms, the triggers of anxiety, I believe there needs to be more education around that. And statistics show that 1 in 4 people will struggle with their mental health in any given year in the UK. I think it's 1 in 6 that deal with anxiety at any point in their life. And anxiety in itself is a very natural part of being human. So this is the part that I also want to unpack today with you all. If I just peel back a little bit, especially what you're saying about the trigger point, for running a business. So when I was running my second business, I actually went through this whole experience of going through very high levels of stress, which was unresolved for a long period of time, which meant I ended up going through burnout, which is a state of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion, like a car running on empty, like there's no fuel, there's nothing left to give. But you just keep trying to go. Does anyone relate to that on this call? When you're feeling completely exhausted, but you're like, oh, I should just keep going, I can do this. And because mental health is hidden, you can't see it, it's silent, we can easily convince ourselves that we just need to keep going because it's not something that anyone can physically see. That's one of the most detrimental things that you can do for yourself. And that's something I learned in a very big way in 2013, 14. So I went through high levels of stress, burnout, went through a period of depression, and then anxiety attacks, also known as panic attacks, on and off for about a year. And at the time, I didn't know what I was going through. I didn't label it. I didn't say I am depressed or I'm having a panic attack, which made it all the more scary to go through, really, because especially panic attacks are incredibly intense physical response in the body. And I didn't even have it diagnosed the one time I went to the doctors. So it was all hindsight, education, becoming a mental health trainer myself, entering into this field and learning about neuroscience and how the brain works, etc. That actually led me to understand really what it's all about. So that for me is my big trigger point, what you asked me before, why it is that I do what I do every day, because I don't want any entrepreneur to have to go through struggling with anxiety, stress and burnout and not knowing what they're going through. So that's the pillar of, how and why we created all our courses and our content, to educate people and to support them along the way. So I think there is more education that is needed, and that's why we do what we do. And I'm just making sure I have actually answered your question now. So
is it obviously running your own business is incredibly stressful. Do you think that it causes mental health issues? Do you think running a business and the stresses and strains of managing people and balancing cash and working so many hours and strained relationships, does that trigger anxiety and mental health?
It can trigger it. I would say that there's something to be said for acceptance. When you go into choosing that path of becoming an entrepreneur and running your business, there has to be this level of acceptance that it's not always going to be rosy, that there are going to be ups and downs. And some days it will really test your patience. And if you want to keep going, like that's just part of the fact really of being an entrepreneur. And it's a story that I've heard time and time and time again from many people. It will test your patience, and it will test, your belief and your drive in what you're doing. However, when those days come, what you just said then, what's your trigger, what's your why, that's the key thing that you have to keep coming back to. So I wouldn't say necessarily it causes, but anything can trigger a mental health concern. Anything can keep building anxiety. Stress and anxiety are actually very common parts of being human. And this is the thing, when we talk about anxiety, if we look at it on a very basic level, you have mild forms of anxiety and you have anxiety disorders, that are more serious or more ongoing and longer term that people could be going through. But in essence, anxiety in and of itself is an incredibly universal experience. Everyone that lives on earth can experience anxiety from time to time. And it's, generally links to a sense of feeling out of control in some way. You're feeling highly stressed, feeling overwhelmed, you're not sure what to do, and you're feeling that sense of feeling out of control. everyone has different levels of tolerance. So for some people, they can feel like they got a good handle on it. They might recognize there's certain anxious symptoms that they feel, but actually, you know, they can do things, or they know things that help them manage those signs and symptoms. For others, it can be very, very triggering. So I think it's incredibly important to get to know yourself on a very deep level. You know, if you're looking to run a business and enter the entrepreneur space, knowing yourself, and it's a continuous journey, but having a good sense of self-awareness and designing your business in a way that makes time for taking care of your mental health and well-being. I think that's something that isn't spoken about enough in the entrepreneur space, and that can also help save and peel back a lot of energy that can be, you know, I don't like to say the word wasted, but, you know, can be spent in struggling ongoing for long periods of time without realizing what else you can do to help yourself. Because it can be a very mentally strained, you know, time, especially in the early days when you're wearing so many different business hats, you know, juggling all different strands of a business. That in itself is very testing and very trying. So, peeling back to that, my original answer, it's doing that deep self work at some point, you know, whilst you're setting up your business. It's not just about what does a business need, but it's also like, what do I need? What are my tolerance levels? What are my resilience levels? Where would I maybe need more help? And actually, what does anxiety feel like and stress feel like for me, so that I know when I need to peel back and regroup, you know, before moving forwards.
How this kind of understanding yourself is a big part of understanding whether there's an issue that needs some kind of attention. How important in your eyes is it that you surround yourself with the right people to help? Because I think if you're not surrounded with the right people, you tend to probably keep things to yourself because you don't want to share it, you don't want to be seen as weak or whatever, you don't want to be ridiculed. You know, I'm working with a client at the moment. I've just started working with him, and he's pre-revenue, and his wife's on him all the time. You know, go get a proper job. You're not earning money. You need to provide for the household, and it's driving a behaviour in him that's not going to help him because his wife isn't supportive of what he's trying to achieve. So, how important is it, whether it's kind of family, friends, other work people? How important is it that you surround yourself with people that can help you through difficult times?
Yeah, no, that's an incredibly important question. So I think it's absolutely essential, like without a doubt. We inherently, as human beings, we have very similar basic human needs, that we all feel the need to feel understood, to feel appreciated, to feel valued, to feel listened to, and like our voice is heard and like it matters. So that those are inherent needs within us. So no matter what situation we're in, and however resilient, you know, we may feel that we are, we all need each other from time to time, and we all need to lean on people from time to time. And without a shadow of a doubt, in the world of entrepreneurship, you know, we're not talking about working within teams, it's being an entrepreneur, especially, and being the business owner and having the weight of running that business on you. It's so critical to have a network of people who are like-minded and who get that and who understand that, so you don't feel alone, because loneliness in itself is such a huge issue at the moment as well, and not just for older people but younger people these days too. And there's a lot of really interesting studies that have come out in the last couple of years around loneliness in the UK. So actually that in itself, and in different parts of the world as well, you know, is a bit of a wake-up call to us too, that, you know, we're all human. No matter what stage we're at in our life, we do need each other. And when you're on that path of entrepreneurship, not everybody chooses that path. That's also something really important to remember. So to make sure that you do have people in your network that you can bounce ideas off, or just go to say, you know, I'm having a really challenging day. How is it going for you? And just have that connection, that feeds that innate human desire and need that we have to feel connected and feel that, you know, we're not alone. So to meet that very basic human need is important. So whether it's, you know, professional networks that you have of people you can connect with, whether it's, you know, emotional support, you know, family, friends, associates. But it is, of course, very difficult if it's people you're living with or family that don't quite understand. And I fully appreciate that. That is really difficult. So, you know, I'd always encourage that conversation to be had as early as possible when you're planning, you know, to run your business, but express that you fundamentally need their support. They may not always agree with your decision, but it's something that you fundamentally believe that you have to do and have to give a try in your life, to say that you've at least tried and done it, you know, you don't, to avoid any regrets, etc.
because all that's going to do is it's going to create a scenario where you can't talk to those people close to you for fear of ridicule, or and that just makes it an even lonelier place, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that can, trigger, further concerns when it comes to mental health, because it can just become a spiral, and the biggest thing that gets in our way is our mind, when you really think about it, because like no one can see what's going on in your mind, but the difference in mindset, and you're an expert in this space, Gary, around mindset, right? The difference between a day that you have when you're like, yeah, I can do this, I'm feeling really motivated, and then a day when you're like, oh, I can't do this, I'm failing, this is awful. And we all fluctuate, right? But this is also why it's so important to have people who are champions and who can say, you can do this, you have got this. Remind yourself of all that you've achieved. Crikey, I think achievements timeline every now and then is very important to do as an entrepreneur. Remind yourself of all that you've achieved up to this point, especially those days where you're feeling like, a lack of motivation perhaps, or you are struggling, or maybe feel, quite alone in what you're doing for whatever reason. Just remind yourself how far you've come, because not everyone chooses to be an entrepreneur.
Yes, it's not about the hurdles you've not overcome, it's about the hurdles you have overcome and what you have achieved, isn't it? Yeah. There's a lady in my network who talks about having a brag book. So every time you achieve something, it might be you've put your prices up, you've won a new client, you've tackled a particular problem, you might have completed a piece of study, whatever it might be. You might have switched off for the afternoon and not checked your emails. Anything at all that's even if it's a very, very small success, write it down in your brag book. So when you're having a tough time of it and you're kind of reflecting on, I'm a failure, I'm a fraud, I'm whatever it might be, have a look in your brag book and remind yourself of all the things that you've achieved.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Yeah, and I do something similar with my clients sometimes, where I suggest that I suggest to you all to have a jar, like an achievements jar, and something that you can physically see in your space. And every time something great happens, quickly grab a little notepad, or a little post-it note or something. Yeah. Write it down, fold it, and just put it away. And then on the days when it's difficult, just pour that achievements jar out and just take a look through all the notes, and then that can be a little confidence booster as well.
Same concept, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tanya, what it is stressful running a business. There is anxiety. What are some of the telltale signs that people tuning in can look for to understand whether there's a problem, both in themselves but also in members of their team?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at mental health on a sort of fundamental basis to start with, so if you imagine it like a scale, right? So you've got sort of like positive mental health, which I don't believe gets talked about enough as well, like good mental health, and therein lies a bit of the stigma still. There's a lot of conversation about when we're struggling and when there's an issue, and what we need to do, and that of course is incredibly important, and it's essential. Is a big part of what we do, educate on our courses. However, there needs to be this balance of also talking about good mental health. What does that mean to experience good mental health, or to be living with a positive state of well-being from any given day, right? Because just like our physical and emotional health, mental health fluctuates up and down, and it's not about achieving a state where you're like, right, that's it, I'm never going to struggle again, I'm 100% confident. That's not really being human, right? We all struggle, we all have ups and downs, and some days will feel better than others. But if we look at it as that scale, so from positive state to a kind of neutral state in the middle, where you're like, not feeling amazing, but I'm not feeling too bad, and a few stresses I'm going through, but I've got a pretty good handle on things. And then you've got poor mental health, and then, potentially, stronger mental health conditions, or, struggling longer term. But it is this fluctuation. So when we look at mental health in this way, this can help make it a bit more accessible, to think about all the different types of mental health conditions that are, but also the days when we do feel really well and we're feeling positive and confident and happy in ourselves, and, embracing positivity. So when you're looking at signs for yourself, there's, like I said before, with anxiety, there's a mild state of anxiety where you might feel sort of fluttering of symptoms, but then there's more anxiety disorders, which can be a longer term basis. So it depends to the extent at which you keep experiencing that anxiety as to when it could escalate. But examples of some signs and symptoms that you may experience. Now, stress and anxiety often get talked about together quite a lot. So just to give you a bit of an understanding about that too, stress is something we all go through. It's a perfectly normal part of being human. But again, there are levels with stress. So the higher levels of stress you're experiencing, the more symptoms of anxiety you could experience too. So that could be any range of symptoms, really, varying from physical, emotional, and behavioral responses, right? Psychological responses. So very common ones can tend to be within your digestive system. So when you're in your stomach, there's a lot of research around how the brain and the gut are interlinked, and they share similar chemicals. So if you're psychologically going through a lot of worrying, stressed, overwhelming thoughts, it can have an impact on your digestive system. Can create tightness and pain and issues. You can also develop pains and aches in any different types of parts of your body that weren't there before. So muscles and joint aches and pains. Pain in your chest is very common as well, especially when people feel very constrained or constricted breathing, or if they fear that they're having a panic attack, because that's all happening around here. But yeah, you can experience increased heart rate, like I say, constricted breathing, sweaty palms, shaking, going hot and cold in temperature is also very common. So quite feverish symptoms, nausea, feeling sick, those are all very common symptoms of anxiety. And sometimes you can feel like you have an onslaught of all different types of symptoms in one go. But then psychologically, if you have a lot of worrying thoughts going through your mind, that can develop into intrusive thoughts, which means it feels like, a high number, or all of your thoughts feel like they're weighed down with, unwelcome, distressing, disconcerting thoughts. And sometimes thoughts that don't even feel like they link with your personality or behavior. They're just very random and disturbing. And then that can lead to potentially, OCD habits, those obsessive compulsive disorder habits on a, we're talking longer term basis here. But also behaviorally speaking, you've got, then tearfulness, emotional responses. It can affect your sleep if you struggle to switch off at night, if you've got a lot of thoughts on your mind. And if it's affecting your sleep, how do you feel the next day? It can affect your productivity, your motivation, your reactiveness. So you become less, say, responsive to situation and you feel more reactive and on the spot. Right. So I hope that gives you quite a good overview of the different types of signs and symptoms that you can look out for. But the key thing that I would say is every single person has their own sense of norm. So understanding what your normal is will help you identify when things feel off balance and off kilter. So for example, are you usually pretty, moderate tempered individual, or are you quite a hyperactive, excitable, chatty person? Are you really chilled usually? You're very quiet, not really, that, you're quite happy to be in your own company, for example. And when you start behaving and experiencing symptoms and signs that are quite away from that sense of norm for yourself, that can be an indication that there may be something there that needs to be addressed.
There's some great insight there into some of the symptoms to look out for. What's the impact of having this anxiety and going for periods of time without it being tackled? What's the impact both from a team perspective and a personal perspective?
So from a team perspective, it's similar to what I said before in terms of signs that you would spot. Just as I said, it's important to know your own sense of norm when it comes to your team. I just realized I didn't reply to that part before. Thank you for reminding me. When it comes to a team, it's a similar notion in the sense that understanding what the norm is for each of the people you work with, and building a culture that's mentally healthy within your workplace, where you have opportunities to connect, to speak to one another, to engage with one another, and to feel connected as a team, helps make it that bit easier to spot signs and symptoms that may be off kilter for that person. It's very difficult to spot these signs and symptoms if you don't really know people that well, right? That's just a fact. It's very difficult. You're going to have to get to know people a bit to understand if there seems to be a problem. So remind me of the second question that you asked, please, on that note.
What's the impact?
The impact, thank you. So the longer term impact, if it's not addressed, can just keep spiraling. So there's been some really interesting research to show that when we go through really heightened levels of stress that's ongoing for a long period of time, that's unresolved, wrapped within that can become increasing levels of anxiety, potentially depression. And what happens is, from a neurological perspective, it can actually start to shift and change the shape and size of your brain as well. Now, on that same note, our brains are very adaptable. So just as it can shrink or change in response to stress and become more impaired and cognitively impaired, it can also bounce back and readapt and, you know, and strengthen. So it's not to say all's lost if that's happening to you, because you can just as much bounce back from it. But essentially with that stress response, the way that our brain works is there are certain parts that work in tandem together to help us manage stress. So talking and writing are two really key ways, and very, very imperative ways, to process and help yourself through going through anxiety. Because what happens is, through talking, you're lifting off a load. Essentially, you're expressing yourself, you're getting things out from physically manifesting and emotionally manifesting in your body to being out in front of you. And even if you don't find the solution there and then, it's providing you with clarity. It's something more tangible that you can work with, that you can understand exactly how you feel. It's the same for writing things down. You may notice things that you didn't actually really realize because your mind was so whirred with all of these thoughts, and for sometimes uncontrollable thoughts and feelings. So it provides clarity, it provides some peace of mind, and a powerful step for moving forward. It's not about finding the solution there and then necessarily, but it can really help you with that next step of moving forward, right? And what that does in the brain is it turns down the dial a bit on the stress response, because the stress response in the brain is incredibly powerful, you know, and it can really be so magnified and take over other parts of the brain if that's what you keep paying attention to and keep feeding that stress. And that's sometimes on an unconscious level. We don't realize we're doing it, sometimes we do. But the part of the brain that manages and regulates our emotions and our feelings, and also where our working memory is stored, that needs to work in tandem with that stress response that's happening. So by talking about things, by writing things down, that process is enabling those parts of the brain to work together more. And it brings resources back into the prefrontal cortex here, just the frontal lobe part of the brain, which is responsible for our decision-making, logical planning, thinking, doing part of the brain. So you enable that part to tap in and help you, right? So even if it doesn't necessarily feel like it at the time, it works together. That when you express how you feel, the worst thing can be to bottle it in, to not talk about it, not express, not share, not do anything. And from your own personal perspective, obviously, like, we're all responsible for ourselves and what we can do. But when it comes to a team perspective, having opportunities in an open culture where people feel, you know, comfortable to share, that mental health is something that you're comfortable to talk about from varied perspectives, and having regular, consistent ways of checking in within one another in your manager meetings, for example, like in your one-to-ones, team away days, all those things matter so much for building a culture of community, trust and rapport, so that people can actually feel like they can talk about things if they are struggling. So it's kind of a bigger picture really around culture when you're looking at mental health as well in the workplace.
Yeah, do you know what? It's really easy, I think, for, you know, when you're running a business, often some people are running a business for the first time, and they're recruiting and managing and leading a team for the first time. And, you know, whether it's the business owner suffering from anxiety issues, which is, you know, driving, they want better results, better profitability, etc., etc., and they see that the team are not, on some occasions, delivering the results. You know, is that down to the wrong people in the team, or have they got anxiety issues that need to be tackled? So if we understand what the issue is, we can help those team members through it. If we don't understand the issue, we're likely to say they're not good enough, we get rid of them, and then you get this churn of the team, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, that there has to be trust there for people to feel like they can open up, because some people will just hide, you know. So this is why we believe that having a mental health and wellbeing strategy in your workplace is vitally important. Just like you would place emphasis on physical health first aid, for example. It's like you need to have a structure in place that supports people with their mental health in the workplace. Because if you're mentally struggling, it's going to naturally affect the output of your work, the quality of your relationships, your behavior. So it's in the company's best interest to invest in the health and well-being of their workforce, to ensure that they're feeling at their optimal best, you know. So it is very difficult to find that balance and that line, especially if those conversations haven't been had, and people's behavior, or if there's a downturn in performance, let's say, can look on the surface like, oh, are they actually fully capable of doing the work? Is there a problem here? But having that really open conversation, first and foremost, like, just peel back and look at it from a human to human perspective and think, you know, first of all, if I was in that situation, what would I really appreciate? Could there be something else going on here that's just not seen on the surface? How is everything going in general? You know, like, have that human conversation where you try to get to the depth of, you know, how are they as a human being? You know, how are they in outside of work? How are they in work? Is there anything going on that you should know about, that you as a workplace can help support them with? An example of this is a manager I was working with recently. I was delivering a training for this company, and one manager said that he had someone on his team who was absolutely usually one of his, you know, best performers, and for a while it'd really been slipping, and he thought that was very strange because it was out of the norm, you know, that he knew for this colleague. And he, rather than jumping to the conclusion of he's not delivering, he's, you know, late with projects or things like that, he had just a one-to-one chat with him and asked how everything was going in his life in general, and just like a general catch up, and actually discovered that man had recently lost his son. Like, he was grieving, but he wasn't sharing it. He was trying to keep going, and that was his way of his process of grieving, following the loss of his own son. And no one had known about that in the workplace, you know. So having this whole conversation with him and understanding what he was going through, and that was the trigger that was contributing to the sort of, from the outset, looking at, you know, a lack in performance, but that was the real heart and the reason behind it. And through going through a process of, you know, working out time off balanced with, you know, a bit of part-time work here and there, and working with him for a period of time, and understanding there would have to be a bit of a restructure, maybe other people in the team can help and support where possible. When he actually came back to work, he was back to being his highest performer, because he'd had that human to human connection conversation with him about how is he as a person, before even getting into, you know, what on the surface it looks like, you know. So I think there's something to be said for that. It's nurturing those relationships, so that if there is a problem, you know, looking to the root of that first, and then seeing what's going on, you know. And you can't force people to open up, obviously, you know. So even if there is something going on, and you know, someone chooses to look on the surface that everything is fine, you can't force that. Obviously, you can't force people to talk, but you can do the best that you can to try and get to the heart of what's going on, and getting to know people in your team, so that you can have some signal for yourself when something seems off course for somebody.
Yeah, you can't force people. What you can do is you can create a culture that gives people the opportunity to chat should they wish to chat. And as long as a leader you're looking for significant changes in behaviour, or changes in behaviour over a period of time, you know, if somebody's normal level is here and they're currently acting here or here, you can say, you know, is everything okay? Is there anything I can help you with?
Yeah.
If you create the right culture, you're going to create an environment where people feel they can talk without any fear of kind of reprisals or you know, or judgment.
Yeah, exactly. And there may be certain circumstances where it may be gender related, who knows, of why they just don't feel comfortable talking to you about a certain subject. It may just be that they prefer speaking to someone who may get what they're going through, or something like that. It could be something personal. So, you know, there's nothing wrong with saying, is there anyone else who you feel comfortable talking to in this team? You know, it doesn't have to be me if you don't feel comfortable, but you know, especially if you're managing someone, it is a duty of care that you have to make sure that you have, you know, made every effort that you can to speak to them. But you're right, it really does come down to culture in the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Tanya, you've shared a lot of insight with us around some of the trigger points, some of the issues to look out for. What are some of the strategies that business owners can start to put in place to manage anxiety when they recognise it in themselves or in members of their team? What are some of the basics that can be done to start to resolve the issue?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think on a personal level, there are a lot of well-being sort of techniques and tools and strategies these days that are very popular surrounding mindfulness and meditation. Now, if you're somebody who hasn't tried this yet, it's not a religious practice or something that you have to follow as a, you know, a rule or a ritual or anything like that. It's really helping you to deepen your connection with yourself, understand yourself, gain and cultivate a deeper sense of self-awareness, so that you can learn more about yourself and become in tune with your body and with your mind and your emotions. So, you know, these practices businesses I fully advocate for, because it transformed my life from when I was experiencing depression and anxiety attacks, you know, so it was a big part of my recovery. But also learning and development, you know, the brain loves nourishment from learning, you know, so reading, you know, being really conscious about the information that you're taking in, because, you know, if we look at the time we're going through as an example with COVID-19, you know, understandably, the whole world has, you know, shifted, and there's a lot of anxiety and stress and worry and concern going on, you know, so using this as an example, understanding that this is something that so many people are going through, you know, we can take some sense of comfort from that, you know, and that we're all going through something quite, you know, a huge shift, but understanding, you know, how you operate within that and your responses to, you know, those changes. So, you know, the topic of this is that dealing with difficult times, right? So whether it's what we're going through now or whether it's any kind of difficulty that you're going through, you know, understanding yourself first and foremost can help you, you know, really strengthen and build your resilience when you do go through difficult times, because no one knows you better than you, right? You know, you're on this lifelong journey with yourself. So having said that, it's important to build that relationship with yourself, whether it's through mindfulness techniques, becoming more aware in your mind, body, your environment, becoming less reactive. That's one of the best skills that I've learned from, you know, mindfulness as well. It teaches you patience. It teaches you understanding of yourself and others. It helps you cultivate more kindness to yourself and others, and those kind of attributes, you know, if you start exuding those more, then that's naturally going to have an impression on other people. So you look from yourself and then to others. So, you know, starting with yourself is key, and then you look from a team perspective, you know, how that can then have an offshoot onto other people. So, you know, we do like mindfulness workshops regularly for some of our clients, for example. They have like opt-in sessions where, as a culture, you know, they have opportunities to tap into mindfulness sessions, one-to-ones or group workshops each month. But also there are, you know, lots of apps and tools that you can look into for your team that encourages them to do sort of like a self-service, you know, on a day-to-day basis, and tap into different resources that can help them nurturing their well-being. But also from a culture perspective and from a, you know, company perspective, looking at, you know, the nature of your business that you run or the nature of your industry, what kind of triggers does there tend to be that create stress, and looking at those areas and helping you and your team look at what you can do, you know, to lessen that stress in those areas. So, you know, drilling things back, looking at the values of your company, you know, what do you stand for? What do you want to stand for? And from a mental health and well-being perspective, what could you start to include, whether it's opt-in opportunities or whether it's, you know, how you connect and communicate with one another. For example, again, given the COVID-19 experience at the moment, one of my clients, they start with a smile moment at the start of any one-to-one session or group team session. And so what that is, you know, they're acknowledging that times are quite anxiety inducing at the moment, or people might be going through stress. But, you know, let's look at a moment that makes us smile. Let's share a really empowering story that we've heard recently or that's happened to us, and then let's connect on something positive. And again, that's nurturing positive mental health, you know. So there are lots of little things that you can do. And I believe very much that the little things go a very long way in creating long-term meaningful change. It's not necessarily about the big gestures that have to cost a lot of money even. It's how we treat each other. It's human behavior. It's recognizing that we're all very similar in lots of ways. So looking after ourselves means that we're also looking after others. You know, if you're fully stressed out and you're not taking time to take care of yourself, then that can have an effect on the people around you. So by role modeling, looking after your mental health, taking time for yourself, becoming more self-aware, taking time to learn, develop, become more mindful, that will naturally have a positive effect on those around you too.
Some great ideas, some great strategies in there. I tend to look at a lot of things through a slightly different lens to a lot of people, and look, I'm not downplaying the fact that the last 3 months for many business owners has been extremely tough in terms of, you know, revenue issues, dealing with team issues, maybe letting people go, significant financial issues on both the business and a personal level. I'm not underplaying those at all, but I think there is an opportunity here for some businesses to, you know, we've all spent more time at home with our family that perhaps has been compromised. We're all probably not spending a load of time traveling. We may be working less hours in some respects. We are exercising more because that was the only excuse we had to get out of the house when lockdown appeared.
Yeah.
Is there a scenario here where there's an opportunity for some business owners to not go back to how it was before and to continue with some kind of momentum where they're spending more quality time with family, exercising more, appreciating some of the things that perhaps compromised? Is there an opportunity here that can be grasped?
I absolutely believe that there is. Everything you've just said there, 100%. I think with anything that we go through in life, we can always look for an opportunity, even when it's something incredibly painful. There's always something that we can learn from it. And actually reminded me of an exercise that I've been doing with some of our members recently in our Karma community. And especially during this time, but this is a tip and an exercise that you can use in any difficult situation you go through. We address and acknowledge, because it is important to acknowledge the difficulties, you know, no need to squash them and say, oh, you know, but I'll be fine, because that's what can lead to stress and burnout and worse, you know. So acknowledge, you know, yes, this is painful. Yes, this is difficult. Yes, this is stressful. Right, what have I lost? So we take time to acknowledge that as in terms of what have I lost recently, in terms of I feel, you know, I've lost the ability to be able to see people in person as much as I'd like to. I've lost a bit, I feel like I've lost a bit of my freedom. I feel like I've lost motivation or whatever it is, right? Okay, and we acknowledge those things. And then we say, what have I gained recently? Let's look on the flip side. So what have I been gaining as a result of the things that I feel like I've lost? So, you know, by not seeing many people as I want to in person, I've actually strengthened more relationships with the people who matter most to me, because I'm making an extra effort to be in touch with them. Yeah. You know, I feel like I've lost a bit of my freedom in going out, but actually I've gained more time, like you say, at home with family, or, you know, to get a bit more peace and quiet and actually not feel like I have to keep up with the pace every day. That was actually getting quite jarring, you know. And it's amazing the types of answers that come out when we start to explore things from this balanced perspective of loss and gain. So that might help you, you know, all on the call today as well, just to do as a little exercise for yourself, you know, whether it's the current situation or whether it's something else entirely, you know, to look at the opportunity, like you said, Gary. And I think in terms of what we're going through now, to answer your question, we are naturally adaptable human beings. So, you know, we're created to adapt. We're not created to just stay the same. And our mind and our brain is always, you know, working and adapting, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So, you know, with that in mind, we're naturally adaptable. So yes, it may have felt like a sudden, you know, shift that felt quite, you know, all encompassing for some people, maybe, to go from what it was before to suddenly being at home all the time, and it was lockdown. It felt quite extreme in many cases. But now we've had time, and we're starting to realize some benefits perhaps that have come from that, in terms of maybe a slower pace for some, you know, time at home, etc. And looking at what you've been able to achieve, or what you're able to adapt in terms of your business, has been huge insight for so many different businesses, especially office-based businesses that had convinced themselves before that, you know, we need to be in the office, and actually they can work from home. You know, and of course there's something to be said for team environment and being around people in person. Like, nothing beats that, of course, but, you know, the ability to actually run your business from wherever is one of the most, you know, phenomenal, life-changing aspects of the 21st century in terms of how we work. It's created a digital landscape of work, you know. So I'd be very surprised. In fact, I would guarantee almost that it's not going to go back to how it was. Exactly. Yeah. It just won't, you know, because we've adapted to two extremes. But I feel like we're going to want somewhere in the middle, you know, like we may want to go back to certain things that we have missed, but we'll want to take pieces of what we've gained with us, you know, that pace, learning to, you know, especially people who've been on furlough, or who, you know, have taken time out of their business to reflect, or like you said, actually work reduced hours, to actually reflect on what's truly, really important in life and make time for that. You know, I think there's been a big shift, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally in ourselves as well, to help us reevaluate what's really important.
So the silver lining of the cloud, almost.
Yeah, you could look at it that way, absolutely.
Absolutely. Tanya, you've shared some great ideas, some great insight, some great tools and techniques for this afternoon. Is there anything fundamentally that I've missed?
Oh, well, it's always great having a conversation with you, Gary. So I always enjoy it. Thank you. I just hope that what I've shared has helped people. You know, there's so many ways that we can go about looking after our mental health and well-being, and I think it just starts with us making that decision to, and to actually carve out a bit of time in our days to do so. I believe in the importance of running a business with, and I know you're passionate about this, Gary, running a business with your lifestyle embedded
Absolutely.
within that as well. It's not just everything is about your business, and it can be so easy to do that because you're so driven, you're so passionate, everything becomes about the business, but then other aspects of your life start to suffer, your health starts to suffer. Is it worth it? And how long are you going to be able to maintain that for? So design your business in a way that nurtures your mental health, your well-being, your relationships, all the other aspects that are important to you in life. And it's amazing through time management skills, through well-being techniques, etc., what you can actually learn, you can achieve through a balanced way of working. So I hope that it's given you some insights and tips today.
Absolutely. And that brings it back to purpose for me, because purpose isn't about just what it is that drives you to do what you do every day. Purpose is also about designing a business that gives you the lifestyle you want, financial rewards you want, and serves your clients. So it's about building a business that allows you to have that lifestyle and that income.
Exactly.
That covers the main body of the content this afternoon for us. If anybody's got any questions, just let us have those in the chat box and we can cover those off if you have any. Stephen's just mentioning here, interesting that Tanya observed that Airbnb started in the last recession. They probably have struggled to start in this one. Only different recession circumstances, obviously different recession circumstances.
Yeah, it was BBC. If you want to read that article, I'll try and find it now actually, and I'll put it in the comment box if you want to read further about that, because it was pretty insightful.
Or if you find it, we can stick it in the email that goes out tomorrow for sure. So yeah, let us know if you've got any questions and we can cover those off. Just while we're waiting for those to come through, for those that are online. So we have Anna with us this afternoon. Give us a wave, Anna.
Hello, I've just unmuted myself.
Hi, Anna's going to be with us next week. Anna Galowski from Stratus Coaching. Hopefully you found that interesting this afternoon, Anna.
Yes, it was great. Yes, listening to someone, Tanya as well, sort of, promoting positive mental health and looking after ourselves, not as an afterthought, but actually something we should do on a regular basis as well. So yeah, loved hearing what Tanya was saying and totally agree with all of it. Yeah, it's about knowing our own signs and symptoms. We're all unique. So yeah, thank you, Tanya. It's nice to be on the receiving end for a change.
Oh,
absolutely. And Anna, you're with us next Monday actually. So the webinar we've got next Monday, and you're going to talk about building resilience to deliver better results. So for me, I think there's a natural segue there from today where you start to understand the issues and start to understand the issues with yourself and your team, but then it's right, how do you build that platform that you can have that resilience to grow? So I think there's a natural kind of follow on from today.
Yeah, absolutely. It does really sort of complement what Tanya was sort of talking about today, and sort of thinking about actually, okay, we're all going to come across sort of struggles at some point during our businesses, however great our business plans are, however passionate we are about them. How do we bounce back from that? So I'll be sort of moving on to look at those few sort of characteristics to think about in particular next week.
Oh, brilliant. And I'll try my best to join that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, look, I think that brings to a conclusion everything that we've chatted about this afternoon. I'd just like to thank Tanya again for just sparing her time, really, sparing some fantastic insight with us, and hopefully that's given everybody a platform just to rethink what they're doing and how they're doing it. Tanya, where is the best place for people to contact you if they want to get in touch?
So you can visit our website. It's This Is Calmer, spelt ThisIsCalmer.com, and you can follow us on social media at This Is Calmer as well.
Fab, and I'll put those details in the email that comes out tomorrow along with the recording of today's webinar. So anybody that's watched it this afternoon and wants to dig a little bit deeper, you can re-watch that. Anybody that's not managed to join us this afternoon, I know one or two people have been having tech problems, they've emailed me, so you can watch that on replay. So this series is about digging into purpose and really understanding what drives people.
Just a moment. Here are some tea.
This series is absolutely. This webinar series is about just helping people understand what they need to do to really drill into purpose and what they should be doing for business. And a big part of that is having, the mental health, the well-being, having the anxiety problem solved, and hopefully that's been of interest. I know certainly it's a topic that's keen for me to understand more of, so I'd like to thank you again for your time and wish everybody a fantastic week. Tanya, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone and your comments too. I'm glad you found it useful today. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.